My name is Louis Verheides, and I'm a music teacher within the Toronto District School Board. I am here to help you with your Ontario Provincial Honor Band euphonium audition. First, we're going to start off with the scales. Now, the key to scales is maintaining a consistent tone throughout the whole octave, or for all octaves. If you were going to start with a full tone and end up with a thinner tone up at the top register, that might be not as good as something that is more full, because if you're at the top register, you always want to try to maintain an open cavity within your mouth to make sure that the sound stays open and clear. I will demonstrate what it might sound like if it's a bit pinched at the top end of the first chromatic scale. So this is something that you're going to try to avoid. You might hear that it gets a bit thin and not as full at the top register. Here's what you want to do to make sure that you get a full tone throughout it. First, you want to take a big breath. You want to try to do a whole breath in the full slur marking, and you want to sit up straight and tall and make sure that your diaphragm area expands when you breathe. Things your music teacher probably told you already. Also important, a small detail, is to make sure you hold that last whole note for all 4 beats. You can take a very nice breath after that. It doesn't have to be quite metronomically in time, as long as you just get a nice full breath. So I'll play the last 2 bars of that first line and then go into the descending. That's it. Same thing goes for the F chromatic scale. If you have a 4th valve on the bottom of your instrument, oftentimes that helps with tuning. So for an instance, for the high F in my instrument, it's very, very sharp. If I use this valve for the high F, it becomes more in tune. Same thing goes for the low F. If I were to use this, it's more in tune for the low F. Here's the sound difference from the low F. Without the 4th valve, it's quite sharp. With it, it gets more in tune. Same thing with the high F. Maybe they can see it here. So if you're also thinking for tuning for each note, that's a good trick. For the G major scale, same idea. You want to make sure you tongue all of them because there's no slur marking, but you do want to make sure you take a nice deep breath and try, if you can, to get the whole top and bottom end of it in one breath. If you want to play it faster and you can still do it in an accurate way, go ahead, as long as it's the most accurate at the fastest tempo you can. You always want to play slower and more accurate as opposed to faster and a bit sloppier. Same thing with the G major arpeggio scale. When you get to the high G, make sure you're still keeping an open cavity within your mouth to make sure that the sound stays resonant. On that higher G, try not to cheat by keeping the 1 and 2 down, because that will not have as good as a sound as it would with an open D. Even though it's easier to just keep 1 and 2 down, try not to do that. Same thing with the A flat major scale. You want to keep the higher notes open. And if you're a bass trombone player and you're playing the B flat major scale descending, you want to make sure that when you go down, you think of O, the vowel O. So I can do it with my euphonium because I have this last valve. Alright, so as a bass trombone player, that would be easier than a euphonium player. But even if you're a euphonium player, maybe you want to try it just for fun, because that would be a good way to actually expand your lower range if you have the 4th valve. So that's it for the scales and the arpeggios. Again, to recap, make sure you keep a consistent tone throughout all the octaves, and make sure you're playing at a tempo that will be the most accurate you can. We're going to be going through the B set of etudes, and I'm going to teach you some ways in which can help you with your audition and make things a little easier for you. So we're going to start with Etude number 1. Etude number 1 is your more lyrical one of all the 3 etudes that you have in set B. And I think one of the most important things to exhibit here is your technique in lip slurs. So a lip slur, if you haven't actually heard the phrase or the term before, is when you go from one note to the next with the same fingering without separating them with your tongue, such as this. Instead of tonguing them like this. You have a few lip slurs in this first etude, such as in bar 6, so that's a very important part to show your technique. So I'll play from bar 1 to bar 6 or 7 for you. So you hear how it's very effortlessly done with the lip slur. You want to make sure that your recording has that done for that etude number 1. Also, with the very first phrase, you want to think of your first 4 bars as a giant arc. So although they're not slurred together and you're using your tongue to separate the notes, you want to do legato tonguing, which is making sure the notes are sustained in between but the tongue is separating them. Almost like it's a tenuto for each note, because we want to have the legato playing within this one. And you want to have your climax on the downbeat beat of bar 3. And you also see that I wasn't very metronomically with the beat. It was more relaxed, and my breathing was more relaxed in between the phrases. So don't feel you have to keep up with anyone or anything, because you're by yourself. Also, what you want to notice is that there's a very subtle difference between mezzo piano and mezzo forte. You start with mezzo piano, and then at measure 10, you go to mezzo forte. You have to make sure you have a clear difference between the two. If you want to play forte at 10, that's okay, because as long as your listeners hear that you have read the dynamic markings and you've seen the change and you recognize that you have to do it, that's a good thing. Whether it's mezzo forte or forte, for this purpose, being by yourself, it's not a big deal. Main point, make sure there's a difference. So I'm going to start playing from bar 8, and I'll go into bar 10 or 11. So there was an exaggerated difference there, which is okay when you're by yourself, and often more important when you're by yourself, to have a bigger dynamic change, because you don't have those around you to help you out with that change. So those are some of the tips for etude number 1. Etude number 2 is our more technical one. For this one, you want to make sure that you have a consistent tempo throughout the whole piece. I want us to look at measure number 11. You see that between measure 11 all the way to measure 15, I'm going to play only the downbeats, or only the strong beats of every bar, and you're going to see what it sounds like without all the extra notes in between. So you see every strong beat, it's almost a scale. Dun, 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 dun. You want to make sure that those all line up, and everything in between has to fit in there. So this is how it would sound, again, just with the scale. I'm going to accent every note right now for rehearsal purposes, where there's a strong beat. So what you want to do is practice like that, and when you're ready and you think you have the tempo consistent and you're not going to rush any of those figures, take away the accent. And you can do the same exercise between measures 15 to 19. Same idea. It would sound like this. And even trickier is that it has to be at a piano volume. So those are some of the tips with etude number 2. General rule again, always play as fast as you can, only when it's clean. So if you're going to play faster and you're going to flub some notes, don't do that. Play a little bit under tempo to make sure everything's accurate. Etude number 3, you can think of something that's more lyrical, but not as cleanly lyrical as our first etude of O Danny Boy, but more of, there are some technique elements to this, such as some fingering, fast fingering. So we're going to actually look at those things right now. I would like you to go to bar number 3. With these rhythms, the dotted rhythms, it's always very easy to rush those. So what you want to do is subdivide into 16th notes, those notes there. So how it would sound if it was normally played would be like this. So in your head, the constant 16th note should be going forward, but playing, it should be only what's written. And that will help you not rush the space in between those notes. Okay? Also, what you want to do is make sure from the beginning of this phrase to measure number 5, you have a very distinct difference, again, with your dynamics. I'll start from the beginning. What did you think of my dynamics? Were they big enough difference? Do you think I could play softer? I think I could play softer. So always try to push yourself to get even softer and softer as possible, especially if there's no double piano marking, pianissimo marking anywhere else. So you can show your dynamic range as much as you can. I also want to bring your attention to measure number 13. Now you might see those notes and think, oh man, they're pretty fast. But actually what you must be thinking is that you need to get every of those notes very accurately. So here's the difference between kind of getting through the notes, which is what I'm going to play first, versus getting actually all the notes very accurately. It sounds like you're kind of rushing through them and you maybe know what the notes are in between, maybe not, but you, as an auditioner, need to make sure every note is heard very clearly. Obviously, you want to start slower. And then get faster and faster and faster. So eventually that you can hear all of those notes in between. That's going to be definitely something that your listeners are going to be listening for, the accuracy of all those notes. And lastly, you end with a fortissimo. You do not want to end your audition with some blasty notes that don't have a good tone. Again, you always want to make sure you play as loud as you can, maintaining a very good tone. So here's what it might sound like if I was blasting, because it's the end of my audition tape and I'm tired and I've been doing lots of work and you've been preparing and you just want to get it over with. You don't want to end that way. Here's what that might sound like. Maybe not so good. Think of double forte as full feeling rather than very loud. So it still sounds full, but not blasty. You never want to blast, ever. Okay? So that's it for your etude number 3. In general, my last tips of advice are, number 1, never play as fast as you can if it's not clean. You always want to play at a tempo that will allow you to play accurately. Number 2, make sure you're always making sure your dynamic levels are distinct because your ear is different from what other people will hear. And number 3, you always want to maintain a good and consistent tone throughout all the octaves. Good luck!
And we don't care about the young folks talking about the young side.